Hi guys. I wanted to get this to you yesterday, but with it being Easter and me having little kids and us trying to entertain them all day, I didn't have a chance to get this to you. So I'm sending it now. Just before I begin, you have an assignment due this week. It's in Canvas now, regarding the next few chapters 13 through 15, where you need to actually create the questions. You're not going to be answering a full worksheet like we've done in the past. I'm trying to ease the burden on you a little bit in regards to that this week. But you need to write questions that really demonstrate you understand the points of the chapters and what's going on, showing connections between previous chapters, etc. So I'll look at that, and then we'll use some of those questions in a discussion forum on Canvas going forward. So make sure you look at that. I wanted to talk about chapters 9 through 12 quickly, go over some of the highlights, some things that are important as we get going. And so I just want to start really quick in chapter 9. There's not a ton in this that we need to get into, but obviously he finds out that he is not going to be allowed back into the school. The letters that he was told not to open but to take to prospective employers basically say that he's broken these terrible rules and that they are not to help him. But they're not to tell him that because they want to make sure that he has this false dream still dangling in front of him. And so basically, so he behaves himself. The quote that he, what it talks about is that they need to keep him running. And I thought that was really interesting because the whole time in the beginning of the book, he's running to catch this, dream ahead of him, this education, a chance to better himself. And that's what he's also trying to do in New York, is to maintain his education. And so he's running to raise money, he's running to get this experience. And it's all under this false pretense. And so that's really important. And then it's really important because once he realizes what has happened, his thinking starts to shift a little bit. And there's this really interesting moment where he basically swears revenge on Bledsoe. And I lost my place here for a second. Yeah, on page 194, towards the bottom, he says, "I decided that I would go back and kill Bledsoe. Yes, I thought I owe it to the race and to myself. I'll kill him." And this is the first time that he's ever actually thought of the entire race rather than just himself when he's gone about trying to make decisions. His race has never really played into his goals. He's only thought about how to make his life better, and in order to do so, he needed to follow the rules that Bledsoe made for him, and obviously that white society has made for them. And I think that's really interesting. So once he finds out that his chances of getting back to school are done for, he has this moment of clarity, and then he's able to go and get a job through some help from Emerson, or sort of, because he uses Emerson's name without permission. But obviously he meets his son, and his son, who doesn't think that the system is fair, helps him out. And so he hooks up with this paint company, Liberty Paints. And I told you guys earlier in our discussion that this was one of the more heavy-handed chapters, chapter 10, and it's very in your face. Obviously, Keep America Pure with Liberty Paints, and then we find out that they're best-selling, and the paint that brings them the most pride is their pure white paint, Optic White. And that's obviously a direct reference to the goal that the wealthy white businessmen had in this time, to use the sweat of the black man to further their own business interests and make them even more wealthy than they already were. And so that there's a lot of history of that in the North, because through this very cheap labor of people migrating from the South for more opportunities, these businesses were able to grow. And even though for the black men who were coming up, they were getting a better wage and some opportunities they wouldn't have had in the South, it's still not fair. It's still certainly a racket. The white businessmen were making a fortune off the sweat and labor of these black workers. And so this is really important. And we meet Lucius Brockway. Lucius Brockway is meant to be a direct comparison and basically a reincarnation of Bledsoe, even though he's not in a position of power as far as the public can see. He's in a position of power at the paint factory because he's created this system that only he can figure out. He's down in the steam room. He's in the basement where all the guts of the company are, and he's perfected this system that only he can figure out through all the different dials and nozzles. And when they send the narrator down there because he's not cutting it in his first assignment, the old man, or excuse me, Brockway is threatened. He's upset. He starts to believe that the narrator is a spy, that he's unionized, and that he's a threat, and that they're going after his job. And Brockway shows a lot of similarities with Bledsoe because he's willing to destroy everyone else just to keep his power, especially those who are in, or even those, I should say, of his own race and his own, his own co-workers, things like that. So on 209, he talks about a very similar origin story to his position. He was hired by the old man. This is similar to Bledsoe being anointed by the founder. He says on 209, Lucius Brockway not only intends to protect himself, he knows how to do it. Everybody knows I've been here ever since there's been a here. Even helped dig the first foundation. The old man hired me, nobody else. And by God, it'll take the old man to fire me. And so he's not going to respect anybody but the founder of the company, and that's really important. Well, through a series of events, which you guys read, he and the narrator, begin arguing. But before they do, there's this really subtle lesson on page 215 that Brockway gives all of us, including the narrator. But he says, I've been here long enough to know what I'm doing. This is at the top of 215. And I learned it without all that education that what's been sent down here is supposed to have. I learned it by doing it. Them personnel fellows don't want to face the facts, but Liberty Paints wouldn't be worth a plugged nickel if they didn't have me here to see that it got a good, strong base. And he's directly criticizing the education that the narrator really wants to have, that he believes will help him. This is similar to how a lot of people put these labels on degrees and colleges and things, but it's through experience that you learn the most. You need to open that door with a degree and a good resume and things like that. But this idea in the society that if the narrator were to put his head down, follow the rules, play the game, go to school, that he would be better off, Brockway kind of scoffs at and just says, your education's not worth anything once you get into the real world and people see you for who you really are. And the narrator obviously does not like Brockway. They fight, and when Brockway knows that he can't defeat the narrator physically, he obviously creates an explosion. Okay, and so and when the narrator wakes up in chapter 11, he's undergoing a lobotomy. A lobotomy is basically where you are given a new personality. You become somebody else. I'll make this part quick, but this is really where it drives home the idea that the narrator doesn't really have an identity. We haven't talked about this at this point, up to this point, but hopefully you guys are starting to it resonates with you that we never hear his name. We don't know much about his background. And in this moment, he doesn't know either. This is to reinforce the idea that he has never determined who he was going to be. He's always let other people tell him where he's going, what he should think, what he should do. And because of that, he never develops a sense of identity, a sense of self. And this lobotomy scene really reinforces that. And so that's really important in chapter 11. In chapter 12, he meets Mary. Mary will play a key role going forward. Anyway, Mary is this very nice woman, offers to help him in his time of trouble. But as soft-spoken, as sweet as she is, she also has a really important point that she makes on 255 when they're talking about making changes. And she keeps saying to him, basically, like, I hope that whatever you do, it's a credit to the race. She has a lot of pride in her black heritage. And she doesn't like the way that black people are treated in the North, which is interesting because that's where many people flocked to because they were given more opportunities and more respect in many ways. But what she says is that even though the northern black community didn't respect the southern black community, she believed that it was the southern black community that's going to create the change. She says, it's you young folks that's going to make the changes. Y'all's the ones. This is on 255. You got to lead and you got to fight and move us all on up a little higher. And I tell you something else. It's the ones from the South that's got to do it. Them what knows the fire and ain't forgot how it burns. Up here, too many forgets. They finds a place for themselves and forgets the ones on the bottom. I really like this because it basically says that maybe people go into the North or we go into any situation and we want to make change and we're there for everybody and we want to fight the good fight. And then we get a little bit of success and we get comfortable with our success and we realize, hey, I can build something for myself here. I can become better. And you forget the whole reason you went there in the first place. I think that happens to us all situationally. And it's a warning to basically say, don't get comfortable, don't get caught playing the game and benefiting from the game without bringing everybody else along with you. And so that's really important. Okay? And all of this, now the narrator is basically being reprogrammed. That's what you got to understand is after this lobotomy, even though it wasn't a full reset, and he starts to remember things and they come back to him, it's setting up, again, a moment where he is going to be reprogrammed into somebody else, and everything's going to take a shift now as we get going. And so as you start in chapter 13, he's going to meet some new people. He's going to remember his southern roots in a very strange way. It happens at a food truck, basically, or a little food cart, where he eats a yam, and everybody loves the puns in the beginning of chapter 13. But he goes through and he's going to talk about these really specific references. And so just to help you guys understand a couple of the references, there's something called chitterling, okay, or chitlins. You've probably heard it called that too. Chitlins are it's a pork product. They are the intestines of pigs, and it is a dish that you can order. It's not really served very much out west. It's more of a southern thing. I have had it one time, but it's chopped up pork intestines that are then fried and usually seasoned and then mixed with some other things. But you can order chitlins. Chitlins are really important in this time period because it was only the poorest of the people who ate chitlins. And so there were these subdivisions within black culture. Even though they were pushed down, it was only the poorest of the poor, people at the very bottom, that ate chitlins. And you're going to see that referenced in here. And this is part of like somebody's roots, their background. and what they grew up doing. And so that's going to be important. But you're going to start seeing North versus South show up a lot. The racism that we're used to, white versus black, is going to take a little bit of a backseat. It's going to be there, of course, because there's going to be situations. But North versus South is going to really pick up here. And so pay attention to that. Think about that as you start writing some of your questions. And we'll go from there. So hopefully this helps. I think you guys are starting to understand the novel based on your questions. Some of you still need to dig a little bit, can't talk a little bit deeper, but we're on the right track. So hope you guys are doing well, and I will talk to you soon, and good day.